They say every great weapon is born from brilliance, but this one wasn't. It was born from fear. Imagine a cramped German workshop, lit only by weak lamps and the glow of welding sparks. Engineers with dark circles under their eyes bend over a blocky piece of metal that doesn't look like a rifle, yet just an idea held together by desperation. The orders are impossible. Create a gun that replaces every other gun. A weapon stronger than a submachine gun, faster than a bolt action, controllable in full auto, a weapon no army has ever fielded. And as these men work in silence, unaware of the shadow they're casting on the future, the shape of the STG-44 slowly emerges. Not a symbol of victory, but of a regime cornered and collapsing. A weapon built to prolong a war its creators already knew they were losing. The workshop fades into the background as the story shifts toward the men who will eventually use the weapon being shaped there. Far from the factories, soldiers move through ruined streets, frozen fields, and burned-out forests, with rifles that no longer match the ways they are forced to fight. The war has changed faster than their equipment, and every report that reaches the Waffenamt says the same thing in different words. The battles stretch from tight alleys to open plains, from house-to-house combat to long-range duels across the snow. One kind of weapon cannot handle all of it. The older designs crack under the pressure, and nothing in the arsenal feels suited for the world that the war has become. The Kar-98K is solid and accurate, but it demands slow, careful movements that the soldiers cannot afford as Soviet formations close in quickly. The long bolt throw can feel like a lifetime when a wave of infantry rushes through broken streets. The MP40 is light and simple, and soldiers value its ease of use, yet its short range turns it into a burden beyond 50 meters. In many places, German infantry must carry both weapons, switching between them depending on the fight. This adds weight, slows movement, and increases confusion during fast engagements. Ammunition supplies also begin to thin out, and the constant mix of calibers complicates supply lines already collapsing under pressure. Frontline messages mention how Soviet submachine guns flood entire blocks in close combat, pushing German troops back before they can cycle their bolts. Then in the open fields, Red Army rifles and machine guns outrange German carbines, returning fire before units can even reposition. The problem spreads across divisions and across regions. Soldiers need firepower that can adapt to everything the front throws at them, not different weapons for each situation. This slow realization grows heavier with every day, and by late war it becomes unavoidable. The German army is fighting with the wrong tools. Inside the Waffenamt, engineers gather around maps and combat diagrams. Thin lines stretch across the paper, showing average engagement distances. They see how the majority of firefights take place at ranges shorter than traditional doctrine expected. The ideal long-range rifle duel appears far less often in real battles than theory suggested, while mid-range and close-range encounters happen constantly. The engineers feel a shift in how the war is fought, and they begin shaping ideas toward a single adaptable weapon. It must be accurate enough for medium distances, capable of bursts during urban assaults, and manageable in the hands of exhausted troops. On the Eastern Front, squads report situations where they must hold lines without armored support or heavy machine guns. Snowstorms and storms of artillery fire leave infantry isolated, and the need for a more versatile rifle grows. Soldiers sometimes find themselves switching between the Kar-98K for distance and the MP40 for close range during the same fight. This constant switching makes survival harder, and each transition costs time, movement, and focus. A weapon that could bridge the gap between these roles would reduce that burden and give the infantry a fighting chance. Factories feel the pressure as well. Germany's resources shrink as the war tightens. Steel production, skilled labor, and transportation networks face severe strain. Building separate families of weapons becomes less practical. A universal rifle would simplify logistics, reduce training time, and cut down on the variety of ammunition needed. The engineers understand that a new concept must match the reality of collapsing supply chains. Stamped steel, simpler parts, and faster assembly can help keep production alive in a war where the skies are no longer safe and where every factory runs under the fear of sudden destruction. Within this environment, the idea of an intermediate cartridge grows stronger. Experts experiment with different loads, grain weights, and case lengths. The 7.92's 33 mm Kurz begins to show promise. It produces less recoil than the full-size rifle round, allowing bursts to be controlled without pulling the muzzle skyward. It still carries enough energy to reach meaningful distances. Troops testing it feel a change in how the gun moves in their hands, how quickly they can move in and out of cover, and how the reduced recoil helps maintain balance during fast engagements. The new round offers a glimpse of what a future rifle could be. Early prototypes appear in quiet testing ranges far from the front. The MKB-42 arrives first, with both Walther and Haenel presenting their designs. Engineers study each failure closely. Some parts break during stress tests. Other components warp under heat. Gas systems clog with dust. Receivers twist or crack. But through these failures, the technicians learn what the weapon must endure on a front that stretches from deep forests to shattered cities. Gradually, the design takes shape around the needs of soldiers, rather than old doctrines. Reports from field trials return with mixed results. Combat environments challenge every part of the prototypes. Mud sticks to the gas tube. Dust creeps into the magazine. Cold weather thickens the lubricants, yet many soldiers testing the weapon describe a different rhythm of fire compared to older rifles. They fire in short bursts at mid-range targets and feel more confident moving between cover positions. They carry fewer types of ammunition and feel less weighed down. The idea that one rifle could handle most combat situations begins to feel realistic instead of theoretical. Commanders read these reports and see new possibilities. Squads armed with such weapons could shift tactics. Instead of relying heavily on machine guns for suppressive fire, ordinary infantry could handle more responsibilities. Lines could become more flexible. Units could respond faster to ambushes or sudden breakthroughs. The momentum of a battle could shift without waiting for support weapons to arrive. These thoughts push decision-makers closer toward approving a full development program for the intermediate rifle. Hitler's skepticism initially slows the process. His preference for traditional long-range rifles clashes with the growing evidence. The engineers continue refining the weapon quietly, gathering more results from the front. Each positive report adds weight against the old thinking. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great to ignore. The project survives political storms, and development continues. Factories begin practicing stamped steel techniques. This method reduces production cost and time. The weapon moves closer to becoming something that can be mass-produced under bombing raids and resource shortages. Workers learn to shape frames with fewer machining steps. Assembly lines adapt to the new requirements. Logistics officers prepare for changes in ammunition and parts. A shift spreads across the industrial landscape, even before final approval is given. By the time the weapon reaches the designation MP-43 and later MP-44, the idea has become unavoidable. This design could fill the urgent need for a versatile, adaptable rifle. It could simplify training, lighten the load, and help stabilize collapsing defensive lines. Though the weapon is still evolving, and though the empire is weakening, it becomes clear that Germany is moving towards something entirely new. This moment sets the stage for everything that follows. The STG-44 is nearing completion, shaped not by ambition but by necessity. The battlefield demands a weapon that can survive unpredictable, chaotic fighting. Germany's crumbling industry demands something simple and efficient. As the soldiers, exhausted, outnumbered, and forced into impossible situations, need a rifle that can give them a chance in a war turning against them. The first batches of the new cartridge sit on a plain wooden table inside a cold testing building. The sunlight that slips through the narrow windows lands on the brass cases, giving them a soft, muted glow. These rounds look shorter than the old rifle cartridges, almost stubby in comparison, but they carry a sense of potential. Engineers pick them up, roll them between fingers hardened by years of machining, and imagine how they will behave once the firing pin strikes. What they hold is neither a carbine load nor a submachine gun load. It is something in between, something that might redefine what infantry weapons can do if the concept works. Ballistics teams gather around the first test rifles fitted for the 7.92 to 33 mm Kurz. Targets are placed at different ranges. Cold air spreads across the open ground as technicians raise their clipboards. The first shots crack through the stillness, sending brass cases skipping across the dirt. The recoil feels different, lighter on the shoulder, more manageable. The rifle remains steadier, allowing faster follow-up shots. Engineers write notes quickly, measuring groups, tracking heat buildup, and recording how fast the weapon can return to its original position after each burst. These small measurements reveal a path toward a rifle that can serve multiple roles without overwhelming the user. As the tests continue, teams compare the results with older weapons. They see how the new cartridge outperforms the pistol rounds used in submachine guns, stretching beyond their limited reach, while maintaining a smoother recoil pattern. It cannot match the full rifle rounds at extreme distances, but the difference matters far less than theory once suggested. Most firefights take place within the effective range of this intermediate design, and the new cartridge fits that reality better than anything previously built. The engineers begin to feel a quiet excitement, not loud or triumphant, but steady and cautious. A weapon built around this cartridge might finally solve the puzzle the frontline soldiers endure daily. The MKB-42 models return to testing tables for further adjustments. Walter and Haenel continue refining their designs, each trying to meet the demands of reliability, accuracy, and speed. Gas systems are cleaned, altered, and tested again. Receivers are strengthened or reshaped. The stamped steel components show promise in endurance trials, but also reveal weaknesses where stress accumulates. Springs deform after extended fire. Barrels overheat when sustained bursts go too long. Dust finds its way into every joint and hinge. These failures do not discourage the engineers. Instead, each flaw becomes a guide toward the next improvement. Field trials begin in controlled environments. Soldiers selected for testing handle the rifles with care at first, unsure of what to expect from a weapon unlike anything in the arsenal. They shoot in single fire, then switch to burst patterns, feeling how the rifle behaves in rapid transitions. Many describe how it stays balanced through the recoil cycle, allowing them to keep their sights on the target more easily. They practice kneeling, prone, and standing positions, noticing how the reduced kick changes their movements. Some find they can fire from awkward angles that would have been uncomfortable with a full-power rifle. Others notice how moving between targets feels smoother and less tiring. Feedback reaches the engineering teams, and changes come quickly. Control surfaces are redesigned, sight assemblies are adjusted, magazines are reshaped to feed more reliably under stress. Soldiers ask for stronger furniture that can endure knocks against brick walls and frozen ground. Testing continues as winter winds sweep across the ranges. The cold reveals new issues. Lubricants thicken, metal contracts, and small parts jam when frost enters the action. The engineers shift their focus and find ways to keep the rifle functional despite the temperature drop. They experiment with different materials and coatings, each adjustment taking them closer to a design that can survive both the battlefield and the climate. Combat trials near the Eastern Front introduce the weapon to real battle conditions. The distance between theory and practice becomes clear immediately. Smoke, mud, and debris fill the air during firefights, and the rifles face pressure no workshop can fully simulate. Troops using the prototypes experience both advantages and frustrations. In urban ruins, the weapon shows great promise. Soldiers sweep through hallways and collapsed rooms with bursts that feel controllable. They no longer need to switch. Between awkward combinations of rifles and SMGs, the intermediate cartridge gives them enough power to reach targets deeper in the streets while maintaining confidence during close engagements. However, mud thickens around the magazine wells. Dirt sticks to the moving parts. Rapid transitions between cold and heat cause condensation, which leads to jams if not cleaned regularly. These problems are not unexpected. The reports describe them in detail, guiding the engineers towards solutions. A weapon that can become the backbone of infantry forces must handle the worst conditions without collapsing under pressure. Engineers adjust tolerances, strengthen components, and improve the gas system. Each improvement increases reliability. Each fix turns the weapon into something closer to a true service rifle. Hitler's involvement complicates the process. His skepticism slows approvals and forces the designers to defend their work. He prefers powerful rifles built for long-range duels, not mid-range concepts that disrupt old ideas. The engineers remain determined, gathering data, test results, and frontline feedback. Eventually, the accumulation becomes too large to ignore. The project continues under a new designation, MP-43, marking a shift from experimental concept to an emerging cornerstone of future infantry doctrine. Factories adjust to the demands of production. Stamped steel becomes increasingly important as resources shrink and skilled labor becomes harder to find. Workers learn new methods, reshaping metal with presses rather than milling it with machines that consume both time and precision. Stamping produces parts faster and at lower cost, allowing the weapon to be built even as Germany faces industrial collapse. Assembly lines practice building the rifle with fewer machining steps, reducing strain on the workforce and simplifying repair processes. This approach becomes essential as Allied bombing campaigns target factories and transportation networks. The first MP-43 rifles delivered to frontline units reveal the concept's full potential. Soldiers remark on how the weapon changes the pace of their engagements. They can fire bursts at mid-range targets, suppress enemies during movement, and maintain accuracy far better than any SMG. The improvements give squads more confidence in difficult battles. The new weapon does not feel like an attachment to old doctrine. Instead, it feels like the beginning of a new way of fighting. Despite its promise, the MP-43 remains limited in number. Units receive only small quantities, and the weapon feels more like a preview of the future than a widespread solution. Still, the rifle shows how the battlefield could look if every soldier had such a tool. Commanders send glowing reports back to the weapons offices, praising the impact on both morale and performance. These reports help secure the weapon's next evolution. The MP-44 designation becomes official after further refinements. The weapon gains strength in critical areas and stability in long bursts. The design matures into something ready for full-scale production, even if production itself remains at risk. The engineers see how the rifle can shape the doctrine of future wars, but they also understand the war's trajectory. Germany is no longer expanding. It is defending, withdrawing, and trying to hold ground with increasingly fewer resources. The new rifle cannot reverse the strategic situation, but it provides units with a tool that fits the harsh reality of modern combat better than anything before it. Factories that once hummed with confidence now vibrate under the distant rumble of approaching bombers. Roof beams shudder, windows rattle, workers glance upward each time the sky groans. This is the environment in which the MP-43 must evolve into the weapon that will later be named the STG-44. Engineers and machinists work in a world that feels as fragile as the machines they depend on. Every day brings shortages of steel, of fuel, of skilled labor, and every shortage forces compromises that reshape not only the weapon, but the entire philosophy behind its creation. Inside these factories, rows of stamped steel receivers hang on hooks, half-finished, their edges sharp and cold. Men and women pass between them, checking welds, fitting parts, and adjusting tolerances. The weapon looks crude at first glance, almost unfinished, but each rough line hides an intention. Stamping is faster than machining, and speed matters more than aesthetics. A smooth, polished rifle would take too long to produce. The war does not reward beauty, it rewards survival. Workers adapt to this reality, shaping metal not for elegance but for endurance in collapsing cities and frozen trenches. Trains struggle to deliver raw materials. Coal is diverted to essential industries. Steel shipments arrive late or arrive damaged. Some deliveries never arrive at all. The designers know they must simplify the rifle if it is to reach the front in time. They remove unnecessary milling. They adjust the stock design to reduce production steps. They shift to more efficient gas systems. Every change must pass tests quickly, often with little margin for correction. The engineers move between workbenches with stacks of field reports in hand, trying to merge battlefield demands with shrinking resources. Frontline trials of the MP-43 provide moments of hope. Units in Ukraine and East Prussia receive small shipments of rifles, enough for a few squads each. Soldiers handle the weapons with curiosity, noticing how different they feel from both the Kar-98K and the MP-40. The weight is balanced through the center. The recoil is softer. The rifle settles quickly after each burst. The intermediate cartridge turns mid-range firefights into encounters soldiers can approach with more confidence. Reports describe how troops hold positions more steadily, how they shift between cover with fewer delays, and how bursts at 50 or 100 meters feel precise instead of chaotic. These positive reports reach commanders who have grown cynical about new weapons programs. Many earlier projects promised wonders, but delivered little. This one feels different. The MP-43 behaves like a weapon designed around the battlefield, instead of around old doctrine. It gives infantry a tool that adjusts to fast-changing situations. It allows them to hold urban corners and respond to distant fire without switching weapons. Commanders note that squads with the new rifles operate more independently, no longer needing to rely so heavily on machine guns or specialized marksmen. But the war is not waiting. Soviet offensives continue pushing west. German defensive lines break again and again. The need for more rifles grows, but production struggles against the strain of constant bombing. Allied aircraft strike factories across the Reich. Workshops shake beneath explosions. A single raid can erase weeks of work in a matter of minutes. Engineers sift through smoking ruins, salvage surviving parts, and begin again. Some development meetings are held in basements, lit by dim lamps with blueprints spread across crates instead of tables. This environment adds urgency to every decision. If the weapon is to exist at all, it must be stamped, assembled, and shipped faster than the bombers can destroy the factories. Amid this pressure, political complications rise. Hitler remains skeptical of the intermediate cartridge rifle. He views long-range power as essential and sees the new design as a departure from traditional rifle doctrine. Some officers attempt to hide the true nature of the weapon by presenting it as a new machine carbine, rather than a new rifle type. This tactic buys the program time. Engineers continue refining the weapon quietly under the designations MP-43 and later MP-44. Every small victory helps push the design closer to official approval. On the Eastern Front, soldiers test the MP-43 under extreme conditions. Snow melts into mud that thickens around boots and equipment. Rifles fall into icy water, get buried under collapsed trenches, or strike against the armored hulls of destroyed vehicles. These tests reveal strengths and weaknesses. The stamped receiver resists dents surprisingly well. The gas system continues cycling, even when dust enters the action. But magazines sometimes clog when filled with frozen dirt. Handguards become too hot during extended fire. Engineers back home adjust materials, strengthen weak points, and find ways to keep heat away from the user's hand. Each improvement brings the MP-43 closer to becoming a true service weapon. Soldiers send messages describing how small squads use the rifle to outmaneuver Soviet units during close engagements. They describe how the intermediate round helps them keep fire concentrated without relying on heavy machine guns. These stories reach the high command and slowly convince them of the weapon's strategic value. A rifle that can adapt to mid-range and close-range conditions reduces reliance on specialist units. It makes ordinary infantry more flexible. It changes how entire platoons operate during fast movements. The designation STG-44 Sturmgewehr 44 finally appears. The name itself carries symbolic weight. It officially marks the weapon as a new category, assault rifle. This name reflects not only the rifle's design, but the shift in how infantry combat is understood. The STG-44 is meant to be used in aggressive maneuvering, in storming positions, and in reactive firefights where speed matters as much as accuracy. Workers stamp the new name onto receivers with heavy dies that sink deeply into the steel. Each strike of the hammer echoes the urgency of the time, but even with this approval, mass production remains nearly impossible. Factories lack materials. Transportation networks crumble under bombings. Skilled laborers are drafted or lost in earlier battles. Some STG-44s leave the assembly line missing small parts that must be installed at field depots. Some rifles arrive at units with mismatched finishes or rough machining marks. The imperfections matter little to the soldiers who receive them. They care about reliability, and despite the rushed production, the weapon performs well enough for their needs. As more units receive the STG-44, its impact becomes undeniable. Squads with a mix of rifles and SMGs now move with a new rhythm. They fire bursts to cover crossing movement. They engage enemies behind rubble without switching weapons. They hold defensive lines with steady mid-range fire. The weapon changes how soldiers think about distance, timing, and pressure. It becomes clear that the STG-44 should have existed earlier, when German forces still had momentum. But the war did not give them that chance. Soviet units encountering the rifle describe its fire patterns with surprise. They note how German troops fire accurate bursts at ranges that normally favor bolt-action rifles. Reports capture moments when Soviet squads hesitate, unsure how to counter an enemy weapon that behaves differently from anything they have faced before. Yet these encounters do not change the wider war. They create moments of tactical advantage, but not enough strategic influence to turn the tide. The STG-44 becomes a symbol of late innovation, effective but delayed. The deeper the Reich sinks into collapse, the more desperate the race becomes. Trains carrying rifles pass through charred rail yards. Trucks transporting ammunition travel on roads lined with wreckage. Workshops operate with generators because power lines are cut. Every new rifle feels like a victory against both time and destruction. Workers know that the war is being lost, but they also know that soldiers at the front need every advantage they can get. They shape the steel with that thought in mind, even as the walls shake around them. When the first real shipments of STG-44s finally roll toward the front, the landscape they enter no longer resembles the confident territory Germany once controlled. Villages lie flattened, roads are carved with deep tank tracks, and forests are littered with burned-out vehicles. The soldiers who wait in dugouts and ruined farmhouses no longer expect reinforcements or new equipment. Most expect only another retreat, another order to fall back, another night spent listening to Soviet artillery thundering somewhere beyond the tree line. Yet when the crates arrive and the rifles are lifted into the cold air, something stirs inside the men, not hope exactly, but something close to it. The weapon feels heavier than an MP40, but steadier than a Kar-98K. Soldiers run their hands across the stamped receiver, noticing the rough edges and hurried finish. The rifle smells of machine oil, metal, and the faint scent of burned lacquer from the factory's drying ovens. Many soldiers handle it with the cautious respect normally reserved for rare equipment. As they fit magazines, pull charging handles, and shoulder the rifle for the first time, their expressions change. The balance feels right. The sights line up quickly. The weapon seems built for exactly the kind of fighting they have been forced into since the war's momentum reversed. Training for the STG-44 becomes a brief improvised process. Platoon leaders demonstrate how to fire controlled bursts, how to switch to single fire for longer distances, and how to keep the weapon clear of mud. Soldiers practice behind collapsed walls or beside burned trees, firing at makeshift targets cut from tin sheets. Despite the rushed instruction, the men adapt quickly. The rifle rewards simple, steady handling. It does not punish the shooter with heavy recoil. It allows them to shift between firing modes without losing their rhythm. Many soldiers describe the first days with the weapon as the moment when they finally felt equipped for the war they were actually fighting, not the war their commanders had imagined years earlier. When the STG-44 sees its first significant action, it is during defensive battles that stretch across wide, broken landscapes. Soviet infantry push forward in waves, sometimes supported by tanks, sometimes advancing on foot through trenches and ravines. German units brace themselves behind rubble, tree lines, and fragments of old fortifications. The new rifles change how these defensive lines respond. Instead of relying entirely on machine guns for initial suppression, squads armed with STG-44s begin firing coordinated bursts. The intermediate cartridge keeps their rifles steady, allowing them to lay controlled fire across advancing formations. Soviet troops notice the difference almost immediately. They expect the usual slow bolt-action shots from long distance, or the clattering sound of MP40s in close quarters. Instead, they hear bursts that remain tight and accurate, even at mid-range. The fire sounds different, sharper than a submachine gun, smoother than a heavy rifle, and more sustained than any bolt-action volley. It forces them to change their approach, taking cover more often and pausing between advances. These moments do not shift entire battles, but they buy German units time, something they have been starved of for months. Urban fighting showcases the rifle's strengths even more. Cities and towns become labyrinths of shattered windows, leaning walls, and intersecting streets. Soldiers move through collapsed rooms with caution, their boots crunching on glass and plaster. The STG-44 allows them to clear hallways with quick bursts, while still having enough accuracy to engage targets across courtyards or down long streets. Soldiers describe how they no longer need to drag both a rifle and a submachine gun through tight corners. The new weapon adapts to each environment without forcing them to change tools. Yet even as these small tactical victories appear, the broader situation continues to worsen. Ammunition arrives late, or arrives in smaller quantities than expected. Some units receive rifles but only a handful of magazines. Others receive magazines without enough cartridges to fill them. Factory workers back in Germany struggle to meet production demands as bombings destroy railways, bridges, and storage depots. The soldiers feel the weight of this shortage during every engagement. They fire carefully, measuring each burst instead of relying on volume. The STG-44 is powerful, but its strength means little when supply lines collapse around it. In many sectors, The rifle becomes a symbol of what Germany might have achieved earlier in the war. Older veterans mention that if such a weapon had existed in the early campaigns, it might have reshaped the way entire operations unfolded. Younger soldiers, who have spent most of their service retreating, see the rifle as a tool that makes them feel less outmatched. But none of them allow themselves to imagine victory. The war has reached a point where even exceptional weapons cannot reverse the tide. They can only slow the inevitable. Soviet units begin recovering captured STG-44s from abandoned German positions. They examine the rifles closely, firing test shots and comparing them to their own weapons. Reports travel up the chain, noting the weapon's stability and the effectiveness of its bursts at practical combat ranges. Soviet officers discuss how this rifle represents a new category rather than an improvement on old designs. It seems to solve problems no other rifle has addressed. The captured weapons are stored carefully, sometimes sent to research facilities for further study. These early observations will later influence decisions that shape future Soviet designs. Meanwhile, German commanders continue to reorganize their defensive lines as they retreat. Units with the STG-44 use the rifle to conduct fighting withdrawals more effectively. They lay down bursts as they fall back, moving from cover to cover, creating pockets of resistance that slow Soviet advances. The rifle helps them operate in small, flexible groups rather than rigid formations. These tactics work for a time, buying moments of breathing room, but the pressure from the Soviet side remains overwhelming. Artillery, armor, and massive troop numbers press forward like a tide that cannot be held back. In the forests of East Prussia, soldiers use the STG-44 during ambushes along narrow roads. They hide among frost-covered branches as Soviet convoys move slowly through the trees. When the signal comes, the rifles erupt in controlled bursts, hitting targets quickly and forcing confusion among enemy ranks. These ambushes delay the Soviet advance, but only briefly. Each successful action is followed by heavy retaliation, and German units are forced to scatter, regroup, and retreat once more. The effectiveness of the rifle becomes a quiet frustration to many officers. They see how well it performs, but also recognize how little it changes the wider war. A weapon designed to extend Germany's chances arrives when those chances have already faded. That sense of timing weighs heavily on everyone involved. Soldiers carry the STG-44 through snowstorms, across frozen rivers, and into the ruins of old cities, knowing that their weapon is modern but their situation is hopeless. As the months pass, the STG-44 becomes more common on the battlefield, but still not common enough. The weapon spreads across units in pockets, rather than in full strength. A squad may have 2 rifles, another squad may have 5, and another may have none. This uneven distribution makes coordinated tactics difficult. The rifle's advantages shine most clearly when entire groups use them together, but that ideal rarely occurs. The war is now too fragmented, too chaotic, too fast for proper distribution. When Germany's defenses finally begin to collapse in every direction, the STG-44 starts appearing in places its designers never imagined. Abandoned trenches, collapsed bunkers, burned-out troop carriers, each one contains a handful of rifles left behind, as units fall back faster than they can gather their equipment. Soldiers carrying the rifle often fight until the last moment, then retreat so quickly that their gear remains scattered across muddy roads and shattered fields. The weapon becomes part of the debris of a dying Reich, lying among broken helmets, frozen rations, and spent shell casings. Yet in this chaos, the rifle does not disappear. Instead, it is picked up by new hands, some curious, some cautious, all aware that the object they hold is unlike anything used before. Allied intelligence teams begin their work as soon as they step into captured positions. They move through cold bunkers with flashlights, examining maps, documents, and any unfamiliar equipment left behind. When they lift the STG-44 for the first time, they notice its weight balanced near the center, the angle of the pistol grip, the shape of the magazine, and the selector switch along the receiver. They examine the stamped construction, the gas system, and the intermediate cartridge. Allied investigators, many of whom have handled weapons from across Europe, understand immediately that this rifle is not simply a modification of an older idea. It is a new category. These teams dismantle the rifles on makeshift tables, laying parts carefully across cloth sheets. They measure the bolt carrier, the gas piston, the recoil spring, and the tolerances between the stamped components. Reports begin forming quiet but detailed documents describing the rifle's characteristics. They highlight how the weapon achieves reliable automatic fire without the heavy recoil of a full-power rifle. They describe how the magazine inserts at an angle that supports quick reloads, how the rifle can fire from unstable positions, and how its construction allows for rapid mass production. These reports move up chains of command, catching the attention of analysts who study captured technology. In the Soviet Union, similar efforts occur with even more focus. Soviet units collect large batches of STG-44s on the Eastern Front, either captured or retrieved from abandoned German positions. Soviet weapons specialists handle the rifles with care, testing them in small ranges outside supply depots. They fire single shots, bursts, and longer strings to see how the weapon behaves under each mode. They notice how the intermediate cartridge maintains accuracy at practical combat distances and how the rifle cycles smoothly without excessive recoil. These observations match their own experiences from the battlefield, where German soldiers used the weapon with unexpected flexibility. The Soviet analysis becomes more ambitious. Engineers compare the STG-44 to their own rifles and submachine guns, noting where their designs fall short. The AVT-40 struggles with recoil during automatic fire. The PPSH-41 lacks range and control beyond close quarters. The Mosin Nagant remains powerful but slow. The STG-44, by contrast, blends many strengths into one tool. The concept of an intermediate cartridge aligns with the way Soviet infantry fight rapid movements, mid-range engagements, and flexible formations. The idea takes hold among Soviet designers that the future belongs to rifles based on this type of ammunition and mechanism. Meetings inside Soviet design bureaus start, including the STG-44 on their tables. Engineers study the stamped parts and talk about how such methods can help Soviet factories increase volume. They examine the rifle's ergonomics, the pistol grip angle, the stock contour, the placement of the sights. They mark ideas to borrow, ideas to modify, and ideas to avoid. The study does not aim to copy the rifle directly, but to understand the reasoning behind it. The concept is more valuable to them than the specific shape of the gun. What they learn becomes the foundation for future prototypes. In the West, American analysts run their own evaluations. They photograph the rifle from several angles, sketch diagrams of its internals, and fire it at various distances. American soldiers familiar with the M1 Garand find the STG-44 easier to control on automatic fire and quicker to handle in short engagements. But the analysts also note limitations. The rifle is heavy compared to American carbines, and the stamped metal construction feels unfamiliar. Still, the core idea catches attention. Discussions begin inside the Ordnance Department about future rifles that might use intermediate cartridges instead of full-sized rounds. These early conversations will eventually influence later American designs. As these analyses unfold, the war continues collapsing around the STG-44's original users. German soldiers retreat through forests and ruined cities, carrying the rifles not as symbols of innovation, but as tools of survival. Yet in the background, the weapon is already leaving its creator's control. Every captured rifle becomes a reference point. Every field test by an Allied unit becomes another confirmation that warfare has changed. The world's understanding of what a rifle should be is shifting quietly, even before the war ends. When the fighting finally stops, stockpiles of captured STG-44s fill Allied storage depots. Some are studied, some are locked away, and others are sent to partner nations for evaluation. In many locations, entire crates remain sealed, forgotten until new conflicts decades later bring them back into daylight. But the design principles do not remain hidden. They travel through reports, photographs, and engineering documents, influencing countries far beyond Europe. In the Soviet Union, the influence becomes direct. Designers such as Kalashnikov and his team examine the concept of an intermediate assault rifle and begin shaping prototypes that combine Soviet manufacturing philosophy with the lessons learned from the STG-44. The AK-47 emerges from this process, not as a copy, but as an answer to the same problem the Germans faced. The modern battlefield requires a rifle that bridges the gap between accuracy, firepower, and control. The AK inherits the conceptual architecture of the STG-44 intermediate rounds, detachable magazines, select fire capability, robust construction, but expresses it with entirely different engineering choices. In the United States, changes unfold more slowly, but the influence is undeniable. Debates over ammunition and design standards eventually lead toward the development of the AR-15 and later the M16, rifles built around intermediate cartridges that echo the logic behind the Kurz round. The American approach favors lighter materials, different ergonomics, and distinct gas systems. But the underlying idea that infantry need a versatile rifle capable of automatic fire with manageable recoil mirrors, the philosophy born in the German weapon offices during the darkest years of the war. Across Europe, similar discussions take place. Countries recovering from the war study captured STG-44s and begin experimenting with their own designs. The concept spreads to nations that never fought in Europe, but receive rifles through surplus sales or captured stockpiles passed between armies. In each case, the design pushes military doctrine toward lighter, more adaptable rifles. The age of the old bolt-action service rifle fades quickly in the years following the war, replaced by a new generation of weapons whose lineage traces back to the stamped steel and rough edges of the STG-44. Allied researchers note how the rifle's philosophy aligns with modern infantry tactics. Squads need weapons that allow rapid fire suppression without sacrificing accuracy. They need rifles that work in forests, cities, and across open ground. They need ammunition light enough to carry in quantity, yet powerful enough to engage at meaningful ranges. The STG-44's architecture answers these needs better than older designs. Even if the war had continued, the direction of global firearms development would have shifted toward its principles sooner or later. The rifle simply arrived early enough to prove what the future would require. When the war ends, Germany lies in ruins. The streets are cracked open by bomb blasts, factories sit in twisted piles of steel, and towns that once echoed with marching boots now stand silent. Among this destruction, the STG-44 appears in unexpected places under collapsed beams, in soot-covered armories, inside sealed wooden crates buried beneath rubble. Many rifles are warped by heat or crushed under fallen walls, but others remain intact, protected by chance. They wait quietly in the shadows, their creators defeated, their purpose unfinished. For a moment, it seems the rifle's story will end here, buried alongside the empire that built it. But history does not allow the rifle to vanish. Its design has already been noticed, studied, and recorded by the nations that defeated Germany. What the Reich created in desperation begins to reshape the post-war world. The STG-44 becomes a silent teacher, its lessons carried by engineers, analysts, and soldiers who recognize the importance of its ideas. The influence spreads slowly at first, hidden within technical documents and engineering drawings, but year after year it grows until the rifle's concepts become the standard for modern warfare. In the Soviet Union, reconstruction begins with factories that survived the war. Engineers gather in research centers to examine everything learned during the conflict. They study captured equipment, including the STG-44, which sits on tables beside carbines, submachine guns, and older rifles. Soviet designers discuss each part of the German weapon, from the gas system to the stock angle, from the stamped receiver to the magazine curvature. They understand quickly that the rifle is not a random experiment. It is a complete idea, one that solves problems encountered repeatedly during the war. Meetings stretch for hours as engineers debate which lessons to adopt. They talk about the importance of a cartridge that balances power with recoil. They compare manufacturing techniques, noting how stamped steel can simplify mass production. They evaluate how the rifle maintains stability during bursts and how its center of gravity helps control muzzle rise. These discussions lead directly to the prototypes that will eventually become the AK-47. Although the AK uses different mechanics, different materials, and different engineering philosophy, the foundation is undeniable. Both rifles answer the same question: how should a modern infantry weapon adapt to unpredictable battlefields? As the Soviet Union moves forward with its own design, the influence of the STG-44 continues to spread westward. American analysts also examine the rifle closely. They recognize how its intermediate cartridge concept fills a gap between full-power rifles and close-quarter weapons. They test how the rifle performs at various ranges and how soldiers with minimal training adapt to it. The findings inform early debates about future American service rifles, influencing the shift away from full-power 30-06 rifles toward lighter, faster designs. These discussions lead eventually to the development of the AR-15 and later the M16-2 rifles that will define American military doctrine for generations. In Europe, nations rebuild their militaries with new ideas. Many had relied on bolt-action rifles for decades. Now they face a world where the STG-44's lessons cannot be ignored. They experiment with their own intermediate cartridges. They explore select-fire rifles. They test stamped construction methods that reduce cost and speed up production. Some countries create prototypes that never reach mass production, while others push forward until they produce rifles that echo the German weapons design logic. The concept becomes a global trend rather than a German innovation. The war has ended, but the rifle's influence is only beginning. Meanwhile, crates of captured STG-44s travel across continents. Some are sent to research departments in distant countries. Others are stockpiled in underground depots. A few are traded between militaries or used to arm emerging governments during the early tensions of the Cold War. The rifle finds its way into conflicts far from Europe. In some regions, it becomes a prized weapon due to its reliability and versatility. In others, it appears sporadically, used by whoever can maintain it with limited parts. Even in these scattered hands, the rifle continues teaching its lessons. Soldiers learn quickly that a weapon with balanced recoil and controlled automatic fire changes how squads move, communicate, and fight. As decades pass, the rifle gains a reputation as a historical curiosity, an early example of a weapon type that would dominate the world. Collectors seek it out. Museums display it beside carbines, SMGs, and bolt-action rifles, emphasizing how unusual it looked compared to its contemporaries. Historians describe it as a weapon ahead of its time, a design that predicted the future of infantry combat. But beneath this admiration hides a darker truth. The STG-44 did not emerge from ambition or progress. It emerged from fear, from shortages, from an empire desperate to slow its defeat. The irony deepens as modern armies adopt rifles based on the STG-44's principles. Soldiers in new uniforms, serving governments that once fought Germany, now carry weapons shaped by the same idea created in those collapsing factories. The concept becomes universal. An infantryman needs a weapon that can fire accurately at mid-range, deliver bursts when necessary, and remain controllable under stress. This concept continues shaping military doctrine into the 21st century. Whether the rifle is an AK-47 in the hands of a conscript, an M16 carried by a Marine, a G-36 used by European forces, or a SCAR carried by special operations units, its core traits trace back to the stamped steel frames built inside a Germany on the brink of collapse. Modern combat zones, from jungles to deserts, from ruined cities to mountains, echo with rifles that follow the blueprint of the STG-44. The weapon's influence reaches across continents and decades, outliving the men who designed it and the nation that produced it. This endurance highlights its significance. It is not merely a relic or a technical milestone. It is the origin point of a new category of weapon, one that blends firepower, control, and flexibility in a way earlier designs never achieved. As this final section nears its end, the STG-44 stands as a reminder of how innovation can emerge from desperation. It did not save the Reich that created it. It did not change the outcome of the war. Yet it changed the future more profoundly than many weapons that came before or after. Its legacy is present in every modern assault rifle, in every soldier trained to fire controlled bursts, in every doctrine built around mobility and adaptable firepower. What began as a rushed effort to fill a gap in Germany's failing arsenal became the blueprint for how nearly every nation equips its infantry today. The story closes on a simple truth. The STG-44 was not a victory for the army that built it, but a victory for the idea behind it. An idea that outlived the empire, outlived the war, and continues to echo in every modern battle.